Hello, welcome back to part 3 of the magnificent Scandinavian Wonder tale, The Lindworm, with me, Marcus Pibworth, on Stories for Men. Please, if you haven't already listened to part 1 and part 2 of The Lindworm, I would urge you to go back, start with part 1, and then the story and the conversation will make a lot more sense. And if you have listened to both parts already, then welcome back to part 3. Again, if you're enjoying this, please do think about going to my Buy Me a Coffee page where you can support my work, and also visiting my website, marcuspibworth.com, where you can find out information about upcoming storytelling events and storytelling Stories for Men sessions that you could be a part of. But without further ado, let's go back to the world of the Lindworm and find out what will happen with the shepherd's daughter as she meets the Lindworm. Here we are, part 3. So the shepherd's daughter arrived at the palace for the wedding, but there was not much joy to be found. It was more like a funeral. The people of the kingdom had seen this wedding too many times now. She made her requests for lye, for milk, for whips. She wore her 10 shirts. And first time she saw the Lindworm was at the altar, towering over her, breathing hard. She could feel its cold, scaly tail wrap around her ankle. And when the ceremony was over, the Lindworm took her through the corridors to the bridal chamber, and for a final time, the doors closed. Remove your shift. I will remove my shift if you slough a skin. What? Nobody has ever dared ask me to remove a skin before. Well, I command you to do it now. The Lindworm was shocked, and he complied. He began to rip and pull, scratch. He writhed out of his skin. Oh, it was painful. And he threw it down on the floor in front of him. The shepherd's daughter removed her first wedding shift to reveal a second. Another one! Remove that shift now! I will remove this shift when you remove a skin. No one has ever dared ask me this, and now you ask me twice. Yes, I command you, remove your skin. Again, the Lindworm ripped and pulled, scratched and writhed. Oh, the pain was tremendous, and he pulled that skin off. And then the shepherd's daughter removed her second wedding shirt to reveal a third. Another one! Remove that shift now! I will remove this when you remove one of your skins. Again, the Lindworm ripped and pulled and scratched and writhed out of the skin. Oh, the pain! The shepherd's daughter removed another shift to reveal another one more. Please remove that shift now. I will remove this wedding shift when you remove one of your skins. Again, the Lindworm writhed and scratched and pulled. The pain even more than before, and he lay it down and he watched her remove another shirt to reveal yet another. Once more he cried to her to remove it, and once more she refused until he did the same. And again, and again, and again, and again, until both of them had removed all their layers. The shepherd's daughter, standing, wearing nothing, and in front of her, lying on the floor, a white mass, barely recognisable to this monster that had stood before her. And then the shepherd's daughter reached and she grabbed one of the whips. She dipped it into the lye. She whipped and she whipped and she whipped the Lindworm until the whip was worn out. She grabbed another. She dipped it in the lye and she whipped and whipped and whipped. She whipped and whipped all night until all of the whips were worn out. The stench of blood, the smell of sweat, the exhaustion filled the air. And she took the Lindworm and she bathed it in the fresh milk. And finally, she picked it up and she carried it across the room to the bed. And as she lay down and closed her eyes, she embraced it. And soon sleep overtook her. Again, a long night passed in the palace. The king and queen, so used to this scene now, hardly slept, and in the morning they once more walked through the corridors until they reached the wedding chamber door. And once more they pushed it open. There, before them, lying on the bed, was the shepherd's daughter, looking more radiant than she had looked ever before in her life. And next to her was not the Lindworm, but a handsome prince. The king and the queen were elated. They grabbed them both. They hugged the shepherd's daughter, the new princess, and they treated her like a daughter from that point on, for she had saved their son. They threw another wedding, a wedding more rich, a wedding more vibrant than any that had ever been held in anyone's living memory. And after the king and the queen passed away, the new prince and the princess inherited the kingdom, and as far as I am aware, they still, to this day, rule that kingdom together, side by side. Okay, let's once more take a deep breath together. You can unmute. Let that story sink in. Remember back to the beginning. The king and the queen, the flowers, the woman in the woods, all those princesses, the Lindworm. And now here we are at the end of the story. What ails you? What sticks with you? What jumps out with you? What frustrates you?
I was thinking about how, it's kind of like the Lindworm in this tale, for being this thing that wasn't supposed to exist, to being this thing that like ate a bunch of people, to being this like ruler. What changed? Well, he got whipped by his bride, a woman of a different social class, who was, again, sort of a blameless victim, or was going to be, so it's kind of like, I guess what I'm reflecting on is like, it wasn't the Lindworm's fault that he took on this tortured existence and took out his pain on other people, but so that wasn't his fault. Well, but he did kind of perpetuate this pain. So like, it's kind of like, did he have to take this pain from this woman to be redeemed, such that he can be this, beautiful prince and rule the kingdom?
Mm-hmm. And maybe from a younger brother's point of view, what happened to him? He was nurtured into being the heir to the throne.
Yeah, I wondered that as well. Yeah.
And then his existence was wasted. I don't feel like that. But yeah, I think, like you say, the Lindworm didn't really do too much.
I was thinking about the parents too. Like, well, isn't that great that worked out in the end? All we had to do was kill off all the young marriageable brides in the kingdom, and then, it turns out this, shepherd just found the right person and whipped our son a bunch, and, it doesn't matter anymore that we ate the rose petals.
That's true, redeemed. So she never got punished for that. It was just everyone else in the kingdom's daughters.
Yeah.
And yeah, about the king and the queen, I was wondering if, so on that morning when they found the shepherd's daughter and actually their oldest son in his purest form, then were they happy because the shepherd's daughter survived, or were they happy to all of a sudden see their eldest son in his best form? Is it because they had all of a sudden this extra son, or I don't know? And yeah, and then all of a sudden, together with that, almost the rejection, or the all of a sudden the second son doesn't matter anymore. He's completely neglected. That's found that almost quite irresponsible of them as parents.
And also there was the bit in the talking of the parents going to the bridal chamber. In the last one, they just walked there. Like every other time they'd run, see what had happened. And then this time it's kind of like, here we go again. Just walking. We know what we're going to find.
I kept, when they first, when the Lindworm and the first bride went together into the room, like I think it'd almost be weirder if he didn't eat her, because like I thought like were they gonna have sex? Like were they gonna do it? Like he's a worm. Like I didn't know how that would work or what kind of baby they'd have. So maybe it's like, yeah, like would have been a weird situation.
I think there are many things that are interesting. I mean, obviously looking at the Lindworm as a non-literally as a symbol, then like firstly for me the shepherd's daughter and why she's the one who's able to find what to do sort of for me speaks in the sense of the grounding and knowledge that people of the land have, which we think, oh, it's a princess, it's a king's daughter, it's a king, so they must be better in some way, and that's where the class thing comes in. I think the shepherd and the shepherd's daughter, there's a folk wisdom there which she uses, and for me at least that scene of her getting him to take off his skin and sort of symbolically beating him raw, that for me that was very poignant in some way, because that's I think there's that in the masculine feminine sense. The feminine holds this deep wisdom in some way which can allow the masculine, and it works both ways I guess, but it allows the masculine to really shed off its layers and become raw and vulnerable. I think as a man I really appreciate that, because I feel that's what a lot of men really need to become vulnerable, to allow whatever these layers are, which in front of it just comes off as anger or violence or whatever, which is what I presume the Lindworm was doing with these other women, not necessarily literally eating them, if I'm just thinking metaphorically. But yeah, behind the layers was this really raw creature who had never been loved, and like Jared was saying, he'd been wronged really, but nobody really knew how to undo the wrong, except this girl with her wisdom, with her own wisdom as well as that of the land, that of the folk. So she brings that in and she transforms them. I thought that was very moving scene for me.
Like the Lindworm has been chucked out of a window and sort of left for, I don't know how old, like maybe the other prince is 18, 20, whatever. He's been left for that long living in the forest like an animal, and while his brother's been sort of trained in sort of the courtly ways, and he's been loved and treated with love of an only child, and so I think then sort of find it hard to sort of judge the Lindworm in sort of that terms of civilization when he's been denied that the whole time, and so you're sort of inviting a wild animal into a wedding, into a castle, into a bedroom, and then expecting them to sort of follow the code of the court, and and so I find that sort of it's quite interesting that these sort of two, I guess, these naive young women and a sort of not necessarily uneducated, but a sort of this boy monster thing that has never learnt how to be around humans, and I think it's interesting to sort of look at those parts inside. And there's a thing that I mean, it's I guess it's sort of Jung's main thing, but I think around Robert Bly, the storyteller, he talks about the shadow bag, the thing that when we're born we all hold the bag, and everything that we don't like about ourselves, every criticism that we hear, every part of ourselves that we're told that doesn't fit in here, we shove it in our bag, and it gets heavier and heavier, and these things grow. They don't stay the same size, they get bigger and bigger and bigger, and it's only when we sort of actually stop and put that bag and open it and start to pick out the bits and like scrub them down or what were you meant to be? Why did you get put in here in the first place? At some point, I put you in there because it was helpful, it was useful, it was defense mechanism, and now it's damaging. And so it's not until you open up that bag and start to look really underneath the surface. What is all this stuff that I've been hiding? What's the stuff I've been denying? What's the stuff I've been pretending? And I think that this story just seems so perfect for me to unpack all that stuff and to think, yeah, actually, like I sometimes like to pretend that I'm this well-trained prince, but actually I've got loads of shit that comes out when I least expect it, and I continue to try and open that bag as much as I can, and it's exhausting, and sometimes I just try and pretend the bag doesn't exist and sling it back over my shoulder, or throw it away, but it always comes back. So,
and I love that the last bit of what the shepherd's daughter does, what she has to do is to embrace this creature that she's just whipped and got him to pull his skin off. But the last thing really is the embrace. And so with all the bag of the shadows, like you're saying, Marcus, and with all whatever is here and all the hurt and the pain that the Lindworm, you bring all that to front, but at the end of it, it's only out of the embrace and the love and feeling that love that he transforms. Eventually, that's the magic final ingredient, and that without that, it's not complete. It's so true, so beautiful.
I mean, just to the fact that he had to take off 10 skins, get whipped with a caustic cleaning agent till they go through so many whips that a boy can't even carry that many whips. And then, you got the milk bath. It just shows you how deeply, I think it's just it just shows how deeply I think sort of pain and resentment and things like that can be buried, such that getting naked is not even enough. It's beneath the skin. That to me, I feel like when I think of whipping, I think of the way it just opens you up. It's just terrible and savage. So yeah,
it reminds me of that brutality that these stories often contain, that you need to do something brutal, something quite violent to unlock something. Like there's the Brothers Grimm story, the Frog Prince. I know the Disney one is she kisses it and it becomes a prince, but in the Brothers Grimm one, she gets annoyed when it keeps asking to go in her bed, and she picks it up and smashes it against the wall. And it's only when she smashes it against the wall that he becomes this prince. And I think there's something
not good for Disney
in that, isn't there? There's something in that sort of act that you have to really sort of jolt it. You have to. It's not an easy journey. It's not a pleasant journey. When you go on that journey, you have to cross sort of boundaries that you never imagined you would, do things that you wouldn't, to find what's really underneath all that. And we build up these masks and this body armor throughout our lives, and to really be vulnerable, you sometimes have to do something quite drastic, like be chucked against a wall or whipped. Maybe not literally, maybe sometimes literally, who knows.
Sometimes sometimes That's the wisdom of a story like this. Is so, I'm just thinking about it. So in what you're saying and how they describe it in the story, you do go through these things. If there's a real transformation that has to happen, it's tough. It's literally the shedding of a skin, like a snake as well. That's why snakes are revered sort of in so many cultures, because it's the shedding of the skin. But to be able to describe that life process in a story in such a concise way is so incredible. That's why it's amazing stories like these exist, and so many of these that exist. So amazing. Not the Disney versions. Though they serve their own purpose, I guess, in some ways. It's really interesting.
And I think even stories like this, you can find lots of different versions. I like this story, and it's one of the sort of, this version is, or a similar version is sort of the first one I really encountered. I've added in bits from some other versions I've heard as well, but they are quite different. The different ways they get told. Like there's some versions where she throws a bucket of water with onions under the bed, and that's what the old woman in the woods tells her to do, and that's sort of the process rather than the flowers. And there's some versions where the Lindworm is more sort of invited to stay in the castle, and he stays in there all the time. He doesn't go back out into the woods after he's eaten the bride. He's sort of there, but they're bringing him brides all the time, and so I think they're interesting, these stories, how they appear in different. I mean, this one I think is particularly sort of Scandinavian story, but there's some Northern European versions. But I think those different ways of, and what they mean, and how a lot of those meanings maybe to an audience 500 years ago, 400 years ago would have sort of been more, have more understanding. And I think a lot of those things maybe they're lost, and so we can feel deeper. Like when we hear them, maybe we feel something, but we can't quite explain it in a way that maybe once we might have been able to. And I think that's nice, to sort of feel the tension, feel the things that are happening deeper. And these stories, I think once you've heard them, you keep, for me anyway, questions come up that all the time. I remember when I first heard this, I asked sort of the storyteller Roy E, who some of you will know, definitely Sid will know, and I was like, why does he eats the white rose, and he gets, she chooses the white rose to have a girl, and then she gives birth to 2 boys. Like, tell me the answer. Why? And Roy was just like, oh, well, it's a story. You have to just sit with it. And it was only and about a year later, I suddenly had this sort of like moment where I had brought my own ideas around sort of the nurturing of the feminine, and and a few things. I mean, I won't go too deep into it because you need to come up with your own answer. But yeah, I think these stories are a really good way to sort of use a springboard to get into some of these feelings, deeper emotions that we can't quite put our finger on.
For me, what you just said about the Lindworm that sometimes stays in the castle, or in some versions, and that they just keep bringing on the brides, it gave to me the image of parents who can sometimes be like enablers of the bad behavior of their children, and sort of indulge in because it's their children. What I also a bit building on what Sid said about the natural wisdom of the shepherd's daughter, and that natural wisdom counteracting with the power of the Lindworm. What I saw in that is that she was the first one to have the courage to stand up against the Lindworm and say, no, you shed your skin first before I take off my first layer. Well, she didn't say it was the first, but and that gave me the idea as well that how many men don't we know, or maybe we've had this phase in our life as well, where we started relationships, but there was like an inequality where we, like when there's, or maybe when the girl was too submissive or too not standing up against you, and that there was this imbalance in this relationship, and therefore it didn't last until there is this one woman that really looks through you and can get really to your core, and then and then that's where the transformation happens, and where you find each other.
I think going slightly back to the point you were making, Marcus, just before, about the stuff that happens and how that's culturally defined as well sometimes. And I feel listening to the story, and there are versions of this story, I guess, in different cultures that I've heard in. It's almost irrelevant what happened. The details of what happened is almost irrelevant. Whether it's the whip, whether it's I've heard a version where the creature takes off its skin, and then the girl immediately throws the skin into the fire, so the creature is not able to don the skin again. And there's that, and it almost feels like the details, as they might be culturally specific and time specific, like you said, 500 years ago or something, but it's almost in the larger context of the story, it's almost irrelevant. You can place anything there. The larger story is of the transformation and of the deep-rooted wisdom, and that is really something, because each person's journey is different. So if I took it back into my own life and versus somebody else's life, my transformation might look very different. It might still be equally painful, but it might look different. Yeah, just wanted to say that, because it just such a beautiful story, just so reflective of so many things.
And there we have it, the Lindworm. Thank you very much for coming on this whole journey of the Lindworm with us. What did you think of it? I love this story. I think it's so rich, and I think the discussion that can come out of it is really rich as well. Obviously, we started that discussion, but now it's your turn. What did you think? Please do get in contact. Join in the discussion on social media. Which characters did you relate to? Which did you see your life reflected in this story at all? Were there characters you felt were overrepresented or underrepresented? And can you see narratives like this playing out in the real world? How can stories like this be used to change our understanding and concepts of masculinity? Please do join in. If you haven't listened to the first story on the podcast, The Speedy Messenger, it's a fantastic Russian fairy tale, and I'd urge you to go back and listen to that if you enjoyed this. And then do stay tuned for the next story, which will be uploaded soon, which is a recording of a Brothers Grimm story called The Six Swans, which we recorded at the end of last year. If you enjoy these podcasts and get value of them, do think about supporting my work on Buy Me a Coffee. And do visit my website, marcuspibworth.com, where you can find information about upcoming events. You can sign up to my newsletter to be kept abreast of the next Stories for Men sessions that you could be part of. And also you can see recordings of stories I've told there, and even there's a link to my new storytelling bookshop, which you may enjoy. Renee, thank you very much for being with us for the Lindworm, and I do hope to see you back here for the Six Swans very shortly. Please do share this podcast if you liked it. I'm just one man, and it really does help me if you share this on your social media or just by word of mouth. Every little helps. And I'd like to see you back here soon. Goodbye.